Okay, so imagine this. Your town's struggling, like really struggling. The factory that's been around forever shuts down, and suddenly people are out of work. And it's not just the factory. It's like everything's starting to dry up, stores are closing, schools are struggling, and your kids are even thinking about moving away to find something better. It's a story we've heard too many times, unfortunately. And it kind of sets the stage for this really strange chapter in American history that we're going to dive into today, the prison sweepstakes.
Yeah, it sounds crazy, right? Like towns actually competing with each other to get a prison built there. It's like a weird game show where the prize is, well, a prison.
Exactly. And we've got a ton of articles and research here that lay it all out. It's a fascinating but kind of unsettling story about how economic hardship and this whole tough on crime wave in the 80s and 90s kind of collided in this really bizarre way.
Yeah, it's like a perfect storm. You've got these towns that are desperate for any kind of economic boost, and then you have this massive increase in the prison population. So new prisons are needed, but nobody wants to be the one to say, hey, put it in our backyard.
Right. So before we get into the whole sweepstakes itself, let's rewind a bit.
Yeah.
What was going on back then that led to this whole prison boom in the first place?
Well, like I said, crime rates were on the rise, and there was this really intense fear of crime that was gripping the country. Politicians were really tapping into that fear and pushing for harsher sentencing laws and tough on crime policies.
And that meant more people being sent to prison for
Mhm.
longer periods of time, right?
Exactly. The prison population was skyrocketing. Existing prisons were already overcrowded, which led to some really dangerous conditions, riots, you name it. So yeah, new prisons were definitely needed, but nobody wanted to be labeled a prison town.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's not exactly something you'd want to brag about. So how did they solve this problem? How did they decide where to put all these new prisons?
Well, that's where the prison sweepstakes comes in. It was the brainchild of James Thompson, the governor of Illinois at the time.
Okay, so what exactly was the prison sweepstakes? Like, how did it work?
It was basically a competition where struggling towns across Illinois could submit proposals to become the site of a new prison. They'd highlight their available land, their workforce, anything they thought would make them an attractive location.
I'm guessing it got pretty competitive.
Oh, absolutely. One of the towns our sources focus on is Mount Sterling, Illinois. They were hit hard by economic decline, and they were determined to win this thing.
So what did they do? Like send out brochures, make presentations.
They went all out. They formed this group called the Chang Gang, named after the state corrections director. And they were sending flowers and writing poems to politicians. They even spy painted their football field with a giant message. Brown County wants a prison.
Wow, talk about going the extra mile. Did other towns do anything similar?
Oh yeah, it was a whole thing. Another town, Flora, Illinois, actually made a rap video called Is We Is or Is We Isn't Going to Get Ourselves a Prison. It's pretty incredible.
A ref video. Seriously?
Yes, that's wild. It's kind of strange to think about, people making these lighthearted, almost celebratory campaigns around something as serious as prison.
It is a strange juxtaposition for sure. And it really makes you think about how desperate these towns were and how they saw prison as their only hope for economic survival. It really highlights how economic hardship can sometimes overshadow other concerns.
Yeah, I mean, did this whole sweepstakes thing actually change people's minds about prisons? Were they really okay with the idea of mass incarceration if it meant jobs for their town?
Well, it's complicated. It seems like people had mixed feelings about it. Our
Okay.
sources suggest that for a lot of folks, the promise of jobs was just too tempting. They saw it as a way to save their towns, even if it meant accepting a prison. But surely some people had to have second thoughts, right? I mean, our research mentions this event in Mount Sterling, where they held a prison sleepover before the prison even opened. They let residents spend a night in a simulated cell to get a taste of what it would be like.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. Some people who participated in that sleepover did come away with a different perspective on prison life. It made them question whether winning this competition was really such a victory after all.
Did those changing attitudes lead to any organized opposition against the prison, though?
Unfortunately, not really. The allure of those jobs was just too strong. And this gets to a bigger issue, the way politicians use people's fear and economic anxieties to push their agendas.
You're talking about that tough on crime rhetoric?
Exactly. It was a powerful tool to sway public opinion, especially in areas that were struggling economically.
Hmm.
And while these predominantly white rural towns were being told that prisons would be their economic salvation, communities of color were disproportionately being targeted by those same tough-on-crime policies.
So basically, there was this inherent imbalance in the system. Some communities saw it as an opportunity, while others were bearing the brunt of these policies.
That's right. And that imbalance has had long-lasting effects shaping the social and economic landscape of both rural and urban America. It's a complex issue with far-reaching consequences, and it also brings up the role of private prisons.
Ah, yes, private prisons. They're always a hot topic. Did they play a big part in this whole prison boom?
That's actually a common misconception. While private prisons definitely benefited from the expansion of the prison system, they weren't really the driving force behind it.
So it wasn't just about corporate greed then?
It's more nuanced than that. The roots of mass incarceration run much deeper. It's about political maneuvering social anxieties and this deeply ingrained belief that punishment is the solution to complex societal problems.
You know, it's interesting. Our sources draw some parallels between the prison sweepstakes and those modern-day competitions we see where towns are trying to attract big companies like Amazon. It's like this desperate scramble for any kind of economic lifeline, even if it comes at a cost.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme throughout history. And it raises some uncomfortable questions. Are we as a society creating a system where communities are forced to choose between their values and their survival?
Right. And then there's the human cost, the impact on individuals, families, entire communities, both those directly affected by incarceration and those living in these so-called prison towns.
The ripple effects are undeniable. Increased divorce rates, mental health issues, addiction. These are just some of the social costs associated with this rapid expansion of prisons. It's created a cycle of hardship that's really difficult to break.
We've talked a lot about the downsides, the challenges, but what about the people who worked in these prisons? Did they ever grapple with the ethical implications of their jobs?
It seems like it varied. Some people went into these jobs with good intentions, hoping to make a positive difference. But the harsh realities of the prison system often led to disillusionment and burnout. The constant exposure to suffering, the dehumanizing environment, it takes a toll.
So it's not just the incarcerated who are affected. The system itself creates this ripple effect of harm that touches everyone involved. But if just shutting down all prisons isn't realistic, what are the alternatives? What can we do to move forward?
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it? I mean, we can't just wave a magic wand to make the whole prison system disappear. But ignoring the problem doesn't seem like a solution either. So where do we even start?
Well, there's this growing movement that's gaining a lot of attention. It's called prison abolition.
Abolition. Wait, so you mean like getting rid of prisons altogether?
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Abolitionists argue that prisons are inherently harmful, and they don't really address the root causes of crime. They believe we need to completely rethink our approach to justice.
I imagine that sounds pretty radical to a lot of people. So what would that even look like? Like, how would it actually work?
It's about shifting our focus away from punishment and towards restorative justice. It's about healing and addressing the underlying social and economic issues that lead to crime in the first place. So instead of just locking people up, we focus on rehabilitation and fixing the systems that are broken.
Exactly. It's about creating a society where everyone has a chance to thrive, where communities have the resources they need to support each other, and where we focus on preventing crime rather than just reacting to it.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm sure some people are listening and thinking, well, what about the people who commit violent crimes? What about the victims? How do abolitionists answer those concerns?
It's a tough question for sure, and it's one that abolitionists are constantly grappling with. They recognize that there will always be situations where someone poses a real danger to others, but they believe that even in those cases, we need to find ways to respond that are humane and restorative, not just punitive.
So it all comes back to this idea that the prison system reflects our values as a society. If we want to change the system, we need to take a hard look at ourselves, our own biases, and our own fears.
Exactly. We can't ignore the role that fear, prejudice, and inequality have played in shaping the system as we know it. It's about confronting those uncomfortable truths and working towards a future that is truly just and equitable.
This has been a lot to take in, and I'm sure some of what we've talked about today might be challenging for our listeners. But that's what these deep dives are all about, right? To get people thinking critically, to question their assumptions, and to spark these important conversations.
Exactly. We're not here to tell anyone what to think. We just want to present the information, different perspectives, and maybe even some uncomfortable truths so that people can engage in these discussions and form their own opinions.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this strange and unsettling chapter of American history, the prison sweepstakes, we want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. What if instead of pouring billions of dollars into a system that perpetuates harm, we invested those resources in our communities? What if we focused on education, job training, mental health services, and restorative justice programs? Could we create a world where prisons are no longer necessary?
It's a question worth asking. It's a conversation that needs to continue long after this episode is over. It's a conversation that could shape the future of justice. And on that note, we'd like to thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the prison sweepstakes. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit unsettling. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.